For more on other areas of Trump administration diplomacy, let's bring in State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce. Unless, Tammy, of course, you want to comment on that.
It sounded more like door advice, and he was clearly being very generous. He obviously knows them, yes, it was unfortunate. I think it would be unfortunate for anyone in that situation. But as he said, I'm sure they're fine.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the year, it'll be part of our year-end in video
yes,
review.
Indeed.
We have just gotten, on the foreign policy front, we have just gotten a response to the United States from Hamas, 10 living prisoners from Hamas, 18 bodies in exchange for an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners. They also say that their proposal, the Hamas proposal, they want a permanent ceasefire. What updates can you give us about U.S. reaction to what Hamas has just said?
Well, I can't talk about the details of something like this, obviously, regarding any diplomatic issues, negotiations that are going on. We do know that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has been there. That has been his focus. It's been the Trump administration's focus, is to stop the carnage in that area. But there's only one reason why it continues, which is because Hamas will not lay down its arms, will not stop killing people, and will not release hostages, which is what any kind of normal civilized framework would allow. So they are continuing this fight. It would stop immediately if they simply agreed to being normal human beings, but they have not done it. The president's position and Secretary of State Marco Rubio's position is Hamas cannot continue to exist for obvious reasons, that this kind of fighting has to end after generations of wash, rinse, and repeat. The president has called for new ideas, and it's because we've got to end the dynamic here. But as we think about what Israel is doing, what it has to respond to, and even I would caution, we are judging entities like Russia or Hamas. Anyone who's in a position where we have to watch what they're doing is not, it's not take them at their word. We have to look at their actions. So I would say we should watch, see what occurs here. Obviously, also the president has demanded that all hostages are to be released. I think the world is watching and understands how fluid the situation is. The president was very optimistic yesterday about a ceasefire, and that is when we can get more done. Food has been moving in, but we need more aid and food to go into that region for the Gazan people, who are the first victims of Hamas, and why the world is demanding this end, and why President Trump is determined to be a part of the ending of this carnage.
Turning now to State Department vetting of people going to Harvard, international students and staff going to Harvard. Why start with Harvard?
Well, this is not just Harvard, right? This is about visa dynamics of how we're vetting people.
So this is going to be more schools?
Well, right now it's everyone who gets a visa, right? I mean, if you're
a student visa.
If you're a student, or if you're coming in, if you need a tourist visa, if you're coming in to work, we've made it. It's really been a hallmark of Secretary Rubio to make sure that the elements that we use to be able to vet people who want to come into this country for whatever reason, that we know who they are. Every sovereign nation is allowed to determine who's in their country, who gets to stay, who doesn't, if they're not a citizen. And in this case, the visa process, it's never really been talked about much, but it is our first front on the issue of national security. Every visa is a national security action, and we vet people. And while they're here, it's important to know, and this is a good reminder, that you're vetted when you get the visa. But when you're here, it doesn't mean we just kind of look away and forget. It's not like you put somebody up in the guest room and then leave them alone. You're always aware of what's happening here. We're always watching to see if circumstances changed. But primarily, it's knowing, especially with what we saw after October 7th, speaking of Israel, the nature of what emerged out of the universities in this country, the Ivy League in particular, the Jew hatred, the anti-Semitism, the vandalism, the taking over of buildings, the interrupting of education. That is not what you are allowed to do if you are here as a guest. Being here is not a right, it's a privilege, and visas are that first line of national security. So if you're here now, if you want to come, it's a worldwide, it is about student visas, but everyone who wants to come here is vetted, and this is an important thing for visitors to realize, because everybody wants a peaceful, terrific experience in this country.
Is that a change, though? I mean, we've always vetted for visas. I mean, the Harvard component is different. It seems as though you are vetting those who want to come to Harvard more so than was done in the previous administration. Are you saying that the administration is now vetting all visas to a higher standard?
Well, again, Harvard's in the news. It's a big story. It's perhaps an easy story to cover, but it's not just Harvard. It is the nature of our ability to, again, know who's coming in. And perhaps, when it comes to vetting, there are many tools in our tool chest. We do know that it's worth checking visas as visas expire. We've seen historically people don't necessarily leave when their visas expire. We also are looking at the nature of what's been happening on campuses, but also when it comes to illegal immigration in general. But the nature of the actions we take to make sure that the people who are here know what's expected of them, that's the first thing. And also for the American people, they want to be able to live a life as citizens, knowing that people who should not be here or who are breaking our rules do not get to stay. It's a very basic standard. So it's not just one school. It's not just one category of people. This is overall. It's global. And it's America taking seriously what matters to us in our national security. Were other administrations doing it this way? I can't speak to that. I can speak to the Trump administration and to Secretary Marco Rubio and the seriousness now of what exists as the law, that we are simply doing what every sovereign nation has the right to do, and other nations do. And we're being vocal about it, and we're demonstrating to people that this is the way we're operating. That's what people have to think about, not what was done in the past, what we are doing right now.
I want to turn very quickly to Russia and Ukraine. And a couple of sound bites, one from Secretary Rubio on a trip that you and I were on in NATO when he said, in a few weeks, we'll know. And then President Trump yesterday, what he had to say. Here's that sound bite.
Within 2 weeks, we're going to find out very soon. We're going to find out whether or not he's tapping us along or not. And if he is, we'll respond a little bit differently.
We will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not.
Seems like we've been saying for months, weeks. When is this 2-week timeline that keeps moving going to actually happen?
Well, it doesn't keep moving. I think that what we have is a statement by both certainly the president recently and the secretary, noting that this is not a long-term thing. This is not simply standard operating procedure. It's not going to go on for months or years, that we had standards and benchmarks about what needed to occur. Remember, President Trump's a businessman. You go in with a goal in mind, and there's a point where you need to achieve that goal, especially when every day matters. Someone could be alive today and be dead the next day. That is something obviously very serious, and they take it seriously. But what also happens in negotiations is progress is made. Is that you want to be able to, and you have negotiations 24/7, you want to be able to move forward. And things can change. In the meantime.
Has there been progress?
Well, I can tell you that obviously the president is hopeful. He's an optimistic man, but we did see last week some very aggressive Truth Social posts about his disappointment with President Putin, that he knows that man. He felt he had changed. We are seeing, of course, actions from Russia, sending missiles and rockets in that are killing civilians during supposedly negotiations. So that, of course, when we judge people by their actions, not by their words, it is disconcerting. But now clearly in negotiations, which I can't remark on certainly, or any diplomatic approaches, is that the president is being very public, that he feels that there's this new framework, this new timeline about when we would know if they are serious, and they'll make decisions accordingly. But this is has to be between the parties, between Ukraine and Russia, that we are gotten people to the table and that they know what we are requiring, but it's really going to be up to them.
All right. Tammy Bruce, State Department spokesperson, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rich.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.